Tried to weigh me down, crabs in a barrel. Wanna take my crown, renegade. I'm lighting up the way, I'm inspired. On the trail. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Power Table, conversations for Black women. I am excited about the second season. We are bringing you Black women throughout the state who are going to share their brilliance, their beauty, about the issues that are important to us and about us. So sit back, stay tuned, and enjoy the show. Good morning, good morning, good morning. I am so excited to be here today. The Power Table conversations for Black women, particularly Black women in California. Today, we are so excited because we have our wonderful Secretary of State, the first Black woman to ever be elected to a state body. I'm just very excited. We've have a long journey together. Um, for the collective, one of the reasons we started was because she asked a question several years ago, which was, why don't we have a Black woman appointed to the then Senator Kamala Harris's seat when she moved over to VP nominee? And we started gathering, and after we gathered, we decided we were going to stick together, and then it became the collective. And now we're here today, even doing this podcast called The Power Table, just to highlight the things that we do around Black women and highlight Black women that are doing phenomenal things themselves. So, welcome, 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 Secretary Weber.
Well,
Welcome to have you here this morning.
it's good to be here. It's a beautiful day in California, so it's always nice to be out when the sun is shining and the best of California shines through. So glad to be with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's just start. Tell us, how a little bit about yourself. I know a little bit of your history being from Southern California, but tell us, how did you become who you are today?
Good question, and I would imagine that I didn't do the usual journey, which most folks do. They really want to be these positions, they want to hold these offices and those kinds of things. I've always been one who I don't mind working behind the scenes. I don't mind getting the job done, and I don't also at the same time don't mind being out front and taking the heat from being out front. So it was not really on my life's agenda to become Secretary of State. It was not something that I thought about. In fact, in my mind, coming this year, I would have been really termed out of the legislature and on my way back home to San Diego to do all the fun things I had planned to do in retirement. But life changes and things happen. I'm a kid raised in the projects of Los Angeles and was always raised to be ready for whatever, to make sure you're good at what you do, that you cross every T and dot every I, that you're honest, you have some sense of integrity, and at the end of the day, you can be happy with the conclusions that you've made or the decisions that you've made with your life. So I come out of the Pueblos. I don't come out from a power family. I don't have legislators in my background. My dad was a sharecropper in Arkansas. My mother was a homemaker, and we had 8 kids, and we survived South Central LA. I went to UCLA to become an elementary school teacher, and then got a Woodrow Wilson Fellowship, which is for university professors, and ended up being a professor at San Diego State. And so I was content. I was very happy with what I had done, and I had no intentions of doing much more. For me, the power table was always being an advocate, standing at the board meetings, standing at the city council, the board of supervisors, and demanding things for my community. And was pretty fearless about doing those kinds of things while I was a professor at San Diego State. And interestingly enough, people noticed that, and so when the position came up for the assembly seat, I got a call from Atkins asking me to take the seat, and I said, no, I don't want to be an assembly member. I'm going to retire and enjoy my life and open up my bookstore. And but she was pretty persistent, and so I decided, okay, I'll run, and it's just a 6-year gig, so I can do that. Only to discover when I got in the office that the law had just changed to make it 12 years. So I said, oh my God! So I committed for 6, but I'll do 12. And then, as I'm rounding the corner toward after 4 terms as an assembly member, I got the nod to become Secretary of State. I had been advocating for African American women in the Senate. We fought that battle. We got some other things, but then the Secretary of State's position became available. I did not apply for it, didn't ask for it, didn't see this as something I was going to do. But I had friends in high places who were pushing it much harder than I was. And so I ended up actually being offered the position as Secretary of State, the appointed position by the governor and confirmed by the Senate and the Assembly. And then ran for the full term in 2022 and won. So it's been a journey for me as a poor kid coming out of the projects. You don't even know these rooms exist. You don't even know these opportunities are there. While others are doing things, I was just doing my work as a student, as a professor, as a community leader, and led me into all of these other areas where I discovered that I could do some of the good stuff I was already doing at the university in other areas and maybe have even a greater impact.
Awesome, awesome. So just following up on that, what does it feel like to be a history maker?
It's weird because there's an awesome amount of responsibility, whether it's you're the first one in your family to go to college or the first one to achieve a certain thing, to leave home, to go a certain different way. You end up with if you're aware of it, you end up with the honor of it, but you also end up with awesome responsibility. Because sometimes what happens in our community, particularly among African Americans, if you screw up, that becomes a statement of what we all do. And as a result, it becomes harder for the second person to come along and say, well, we've had African Americans before who were so and so, and very little happened. And in fact, bad things happen. And so you become very conscious of your activities, who you're surrounded by. You're very, very diligent about making sure the community knows that you're their voice, that you just haven't taken a position and walked away, that they still have access to you, and that what you do will last for a very long time. And I didn't know at the time when I became an assembly member that I would be a history maker. I had no idea that there had never been an African American in the assembly south of Los Angeles. When people told me that, I had to stop and think, that is true. I've not paid attention to that. And being a constitutional officer, I hadn't really paid a lot of attention to what it means to be one of 8 running the state of California, and being the Secretary of State and the third person in line if there's something were to happen to the governor. So you end up realizing that there's a tremendous amount of challenge, tremendous amount of opportunity, and that's why I was so pleased that my parents raised me to always be ready. Always be ready. Know how to do these things, but even if you don't do them, you be ready so that when you're called upon, you can handle the job that's there. So it became a remarkable experience to basically be sworn in as a Secretary of State. And it didn't hit me as much as when it hit my friends and my family members that I was Secretary of State, that my name was on all of these things in the state of California. In fact, one of my sisters told me that a friend of hers, they're in banking, and he opened up this envelope about papers he had to fill out and things he had to do, and he saw my name at the top, and he just sat at his desk and cried. He said, I knew this girl when she was, at UCLA. I knew her when she was a student and the Pueblos. And she said he just sat there and cried. And somebody came on and said, what are you crying about? He said, these are tears of joy. I never thought I'd see somebody that I knew who'd have their name on letterhead everywhere in the state of California. So he called, and then he called to tell me, he said, I just cried over it this morning because I was so overjoyed. So it's a tremendous responsibility and a challenge. But what I told people, and I strongly believe this with the various organizations and things I've worked with, is that I may be the first, but I promise you I won't be the last. And that's been my mantra. And so we have expanded the number of African Americans and African American women throughout the state in terms of who's taking positions that had never been taken before.
Right. And speaking of that, because I think, we as a collective, we go all throughout the state and we're always trying to lift up Black women. And one of the things that I just noticed is that, we're breaking so many records throughout the state. For the first time, in San Diego, as we have a supervisor, a
Right.
Black woman supervisor. We have 2 Black women supervisors in Solano County. Who would have ever thought we'd have 2 sitting on a county? We have the largest number of women in the assembly. We have, women from the water board all the way up to Congress. We as California still have the largest number of Black women in Congress, and not that the number is grand, but we have 4 currently. And so when you think about that and the work that you've done, particularly with Be Wild, what made you want to be not to be the last?
Well, it's really interesting. It was shocking to me that, you could have a 170-year history of a state and not have an African American in certain positions in the state. So it shows how backward we are. But like I said, when I discovered, and people in LA were saying, you're the first African American to serve in any statewide office from Southern California, south of Los Angeles, I committed myself to say, I may be the first, but I won't be the last. And so, because I didn't want to just be the history piece and walk away, because the importance of these positions is that we're able to influence California, influence the power of California, and make our lives better. So I immediately started working with a lot of young women who I saw potential to say, you can run for office, you can be on a commission, you can be on a board, you can basically run for office. And so we founded this group called Be Wild, the Black Women's Institute for Leadership Development, in which we run workshops and seminars for the women. And we've seen women in that organization become commissioners. They may not have wanted to run for office, but they become commissioners on various commissions in San Diego. We pushed to get Monica Montgomery on the city council. Then we pushed her to get her to now she's the first woman to serve, black woman to serve on the Board of Supervisors in San Diego County. And we're ecstatic about that, because that is a tremendous position. And people have tried in the past and have not been successful. We've organized women and worked with other women to make sure that these women get a push. When I went to was asked to be Secretary of State, I was concerned about who's going to take my seat in the assembly, who's going to be there. Had no idea. My daughter had an interest, and so she ran and won in the primary. And now she's running for Senate, and she really doesn't have much of an opposition, so she'll be the first black woman in the Senate from San Diego. So it's really quite an opportunity for us to be organized. And I think that's the key piece. Is in the past, sometimes people take a position and they don't really see the responsibility to expand it, to help people know what's in the job, how to do the job, and what you can do. And so we've been pushing that along. We've got another woman coming along. We'll take the 79th, a former student and a former employee of mine. We've just been pushing and pushing in all these different areas so that we can have representation up and down the state. And that San Diego is not some afterthought in California business. But it's been a journey, because I didn't realize how limited San Diego was with regards to not only African Americans, but women and others that were there. And so as we push, we see greater opportunity for folks to do some things. California, Southern California, particularly San Diego, I discovered had never had a constitutional officer other than Pete Wilson. And that was it, who was governor. We never had one of the 8 constitutional officers, we've never had one. And I'm actually the first non-mayor constitutional officer from San Diego in that area. So it's really quite a unique experience to realize that we can, by being organized and being competent and diligent about what we're doing, that we can actually crack into these areas that we have not done before and provide our communities with some real good representation.
Awesome. So speaking of that, for folks, what does the Secretary of State do?
Sometimes I feel like we do everything based on the lawsuits that come in my office. If you're going to sue the state of California, you're probably going to sue the Secretary of State. But, we have things that everyone knows, are very familiar with the fact that we handle all elections. We are the representative, the state representative in the area of elections. So we handle all elections, small ones, large ones. We impact them all. We make sure that they're living by the laws and the rules and regulations that govern all of the elections in the state of California, no matter whether it's a water board or city council seat or some commission that is elected. We are responsible for the elections, and we do that, and people know that. But they also should know that we're responsible for the registration of all of the businesses in California, and we've done a pretty good job in trying to digitize the things that we do, making sure that we have good computer information and access so people can register themselves for a business that's in California. And we see a lot of small businesses growing. We're also responsible for the registration for nonprofit organizations. One of the things we've done is, when I got in here, I realized after COVID that a lot of churches and small nonprofits, not the biggies like the Red Cross, but the small nonprofits that are in our communities, had not filed their papers for their nonprofit status because they were caught up in COVID and they didn't really know how to do it, and unless you have attorneys that are hired or something, it becomes difficult and complicated. So we helped a number of churches. We've had and we've also had a podcast and a workshop on how to basically register your church, your small business, to do those kinds of things to make it user friendly. So we're responsible for the businesses in California, responsible for all political reform that happens in California. So if someone violates the laws of that, we have an office here that basically handles those who didn't pay certain things on time for campaigns. We've got all that going. And the last piece that we do, we have a large personnel administrative office, all those things. The last thing we have is we have the California Archives in this building. I'm responsible for the California Archives, and we've spent the last 3 years really improving and working to increase people's access to the archives. And mainly because of when you're in COVID, everything had to be done overline on computer, so we've done that. And we're celebrating, we're working with some of the women organizations and others to make sure that the history of California is truly reflected of the men, the women, the people of color. All of those groups that are in California are part of our archives, and we're making sure that they get the services that are there, but that the history of California is correct in telling you how we came here, who was here, what people said, what artifacts exist. And so we have one of the largest archives for California material, but one of the largest archives in the Secretary of State's office in the nation.
That's awesome. And speaking of history, I know that you really spearheaded the reparations and what we're doing currently around the repair, right? The repair
Right.
to Black Californians that have been here and capturing that information. Talk a little bit about that. Like, why was that important?
Well, it was important, I think, because first of all, for 30, 40 years, the legislature and the Congress in D.C. has been trying to get it passed. And in the process of all of that, we've seen other groups who've come along while we've been struggling with it, and they've gotten reparations, sometimes twice. They've gotten reparations, and they made their case, and yet no one has actually looked to see about African Americans. And so the bill goes forth every year. And the last time that it went forth, I said, you know what, we've been waiting for the feds to do something. It's clear that they're too complicated. There's too many other issues that they're fighting about up there. We need to do our own reparations. And that raised a number of eyebrows. People were like, well, how could you do that just for California? California was not a slave state, which is not true. It was. And so as a result of that, we then decided to author the bill. I decided to author the bill and got the support of the Black Caucus, and it shocked everybody because they thought it would take forever. It took less than a year for us to get the bill on the floor, discussed, passed, and signed by the governor. And so now we've had the task force that has produced some amazing results. And now that we've given those results to the California Legislative Black Caucus, who are authoring bills, and I went to a meeting this weekend. They've got a great format that they're using to educate the public about why we need reparations. But it's important because every group that has ever been harmed by another group has gotten some sense of recognition that, well, yeah, we did wrong, and we should help you right the ship. We should help you basically move forward. And that was the intent, I think, at the end of the Civil War, when there was going to be 40 acres and a mule given to every former slave so that they could then begin to build their life in the United States, to have some equal footing with those that had abused them. And it didn't get that way. In fact, they took the money and gave it to the slave holders to, so quote unquote, to make them whole so they wouldn't be too angry about losing their, quote, slave labor. And as a result, we ended up getting nothing. And we've continued that. And so the attitude toward the fact that you got it, that we should be included, whether it was the Land Acquisition Act or a host of other acts, they made it so that Black people couldn't get land that was given free to everybody else, that we weren't given an opportunity for other levels of growth. We were banned from living in certain neighborhoods that had great property and had the potential for growth and economic development. And we were basically written out of those in various covenants that you couldn't sell the property to African Americans. We had land taken from us. Wayne Beach up down in Los Angeles, where they took the land and didn't do anything with it. Land that's worth millions and millions of dollars now, and was basically just seized from a group or family that had land on Manhattan Beach. I mean, these are the things that you learn that have historic implications of how we're handled, and then no compensation for it at all. No compensation. So to me, it's fitting that there has to be some compensation to be, simply because if you step on my toe and keep your foot on my toe forever, you may take it off, but my toe is all messed up by now. Yep. The question is, are you going to try to make me whole? or you're going to try to help me walk again like everybody else? And that's the real issue that is before us now in California, is that we have to make this group whole. We've made everybody else whole, and we continue to see the devastation of having been enslaved and having laws written against you, but this devastating impact upon a significant number of individuals in the Black community.
Right. So true. I mean, we just see it every single day that, even when policy changes, if you haven't repaired, we still are seeing like the disproportionate Black Californians are struggling more than any other group
Yes.
across the board when it comes to quality of life. Just one last question. What's your top priority for this coming year?
Well, there are a couple of things. Mainly, our top priority for this year will be, well, there's a couple of things. We're working on a lot of technology things that have to be corrected here in the Secretary of State's, and that will be done in the coming years. But the main focus this year is the election that's coming up. This is probably the most significant election in not just California history, but in this country's history. The most significant probably since the Civil War. To basically make sure that the democracy we have in California with the 50 states, that people have the right to vote, that they're secure, and that the rules and regulations that govern our elections and govern our nation are adhered to. We have so much misinformation. We have so many attacks on individuals. We have so many people who are willing to destroy the entire country for their own personal gain. This is a serious election. I was in Ghana back in November, and I met with the commissioner of elections, and she was saying to me, because Ghana is the strongest democracy on the continent of Africa, and she was saying that now they've got election deniers. And they have folks who are saying they want to go back to a different kind of system, or they don't want the one person, one vote kind of concept. And so she's saying they're looking at us because they patterned their democracy after us with Nkrumah and others. All of a sudden now they're under attack for the democracy, and they see what's happening in the United States, and it's very disheartening to them because we're the strongest democracy in the world. So the question becomes, if you crumble, if you fall, if you mess up all your rules and regulations and let anything happen after an election, then what's to happen with other people who are not as strong as we are and who have relied upon us to be their kind of anchor and their North Star about what to do? So it is extremely important, this election more than anything, and it has to do with who's running, but it also has not to do with who's running. It has to do with everything in this country and whether or not we're going to endure or have another civil war or whatever's taking place. These things are really very serious. And so this election is going to demand from us a lot of work, a lot of efforts. I've had a number of particularly African-American males who say they don't think they should vote at all. So we've got to deal with that issue and help them understand the history behind it. This summer, we want to do a thing called Freedom Summer 2, which happened 60 years ago with Fannie Lou Hamer, to help people understand why African Americans, why women, why all these people fought so hard to have the right to vote and what it has meant to them in terms of their own independence and their own self-determination. And to just slough it off and pretend like it's not important and let anything happen to the rules and regulations from the Supreme Court on down. We have a tremendous challenge ahead of us because this is really the election about saving the democracy. It's not about getting your way as a Democrat or a Republican. This is about the democracy that people have fought to maintain, and as many have given their lives, and we are basically facing an opposition that says it's not that important.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Weber. This was just such a wonderful conversation. I so appreciate you taking time from your busy schedule, knowing it's an election year. And we will take heed and make sure we get out the vote as well. Thank you also for partnering with us on our voter engagement initiative earlier this year, and we'll bring that back together. We saved you a seat, sis. We'll kick that back off in August. So that we can roll into November with some victory. So thank you.
Well, thank you for your hard work, and we appreciate working with you. And on behalf of my staff, we're here for you anytime, and we look forward to a very successful election in November.
Yes, thank you. Mm-hmm. Wow, wasn't that great? I hope you enjoyed the episode and you found it empowering. You can follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and our YouTube channel. Also, you can find out more information about the California Black Women's Collective Empowerment Institute at www.cablackwomen'scollective.org. See you next time.